Hello and welcome to Kalam's answer writing program. I hope you all are doing well. So I'm back with this new week on internal security. So let us look at the question. So before we move forward in relation to this particular question, I would like to list out certain prerequisites that are important whenever you address an internal security based question, right? So the first and foremost thing that you have to keep in mind when you address an internal security based question is the possibility of a diagram. See, if the question is on Indo-Pakistan relation, you could talk about the Indo-Pakistan border. And if the question is on northeast, or if the question is on Naxalism, you can basically point out the map of India, and that gives a good value addition. So the first thing which I mentioned in relation to internal security based question is basically the usage of a diagram. The second thing I want you to keep in mind whenever you write an internal security based question is the usage of reports. There are several reports, be it from the Intelligence Bureau or the Ministry of Home Affairs or the National Crime Records Bureau and so on. There are several other reports even from private organizations. It could even be from World Bank, etc., etc. If there are certain reports which point out towards the security situation of the country, and if they are relevant for the particular answer, you better write them down in your answer. That is highly recommended. So these are the few prerequisites that I would like you to keep in mind whenever you write an internal security based question. Now I'll read out the question for you all. So the first question is on left-wing extremism. First question as in the question which we are going to discuss today. So what is the question? Left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend but still affects many parts of the country. Now briefly explain the government of India's approach to counter the challenges posed by the left-wing extremism. This is a 10-marker question, 150 words. So typically you'll be given around 2 pages to answer this question. So the usual format that we follow is the introduction, body, and the conclusion format. These three things have to be definitely there for your answer. The introduction and the conclusion is dependent upon this particular aspect. If the question is 150 words or if it is 250 words, you can basically increase the length of your introduction and conclusion. But that is slightly different for ethics. In ethics, whatever be the marks that have been asked, the conclusion has to be 4 to 5 line conclusion, because the conclusion reflects your thought process. So that is about ethics. Now we'll move forward. The question is asking us to talk about the strategy of the government to counter the challenges posed by the left-wing extremism. So I have to talk about government measures. But before I move forward and talk about government measures, I also have to establish the downward trend. So that is going to be my first side heading. In fact, there is a downward trend in relation to Naxalism or left-wing extremism. So these are the two side headings that I am going to write in my answer. And moving forward, I'll conclude my answer by talking about the steps that could be taken in order to totally eradicate the problem of left-wing extremism. So how do I start my answer? The usual approach to start these kind of answers is to basically dump certain facts. Like for example, you could start by defining what left-wing extremism is, and you could tell the examiner how it is synonymous to Maoist insurgency, and then you could talk about certain keywords like Naxalbari, which is the area in which this Naxalist movement has started. You could also talk about the concept of a red corridor. Red corridor is basically what? If this is the Indian map, a small schematic, this is of course a poor schematic, but there is a corridor. This corridor has been pointed out by Ministry of Home Affairs. These are the states which have been affected by left-wing extremism. So you could also talk about the concept of red corridor. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind when you write your answer. Now we will move forward and look at the sample answer and see how he has done. So this is the sample answer. He starts out by talking about left-wing extremism. I'll change the color of the pen so that it becomes more visible. So left-wing extremism is used to describe Maoist insurgency. It has begun in Naxalbari area and it lies in West Bengal, by the way. So it has spread to many states in the country, and this has led to the presence of infamous red corridor. This is what I explained in the first slide, and this is a good introduction, not too long, not too short, but it would have been better if he restricted the length of the introduction to 3 lines, under 3 lines. That is important for a 10 marker, because in a 10 marker you don't have much scope to write an introduction or a lengthy conclusion, right? So moving forward, he talks about the decreasing trend of left-wing extremism, or the downward trend of left-wing extremism, because this is what the question starts out by telling you. The question does not ask you to establish the downward trend, but you are doing so because you want to mimic the nature of the question. You want to lie within the bandwidth of the question. So the first point is, Home Ministry report points out towards a decline in left-wing extremism related deaths from 2010 to 2018. This is right. And in addition, there is also a decline in the left-wing extremism districts. Initially, there used to be around 115 to 125 heavily affected districts under left-wing extremism. This has come down to 35, and this was also done by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So this points out that the Naxal activity as such has declined in the country, and this is a good aspect. Second point is, the support to the Naxals on ground has decreased. This is to say that the people at the ground level, they used to support the Naxals at one point of time, especially when the movement began in the initial stages of 1980s, 70s. The people at ground used to support this movement, and this is not present anymore, is what this particular point is trying to tell us. And the youth recruitment into the Naxal cadres has also substantially decreased. So these 3 points are basically trying to point out the fact that the left-wing extremism in the country has decreased somewhat, and so he has explained the first theme of the question. Now he has to directly address the question, which is the government's approach to addressing the Naxal movement or the left-wing extremism situation. So the first point is negotiation. So the government has basically brought these Naxal groups under the negotiation table. It negotiated with them in order to lead to ceasefire. Once the ceasefire was there, the government was trying to increase the intelligence networks, especially in the rural areas, in order to prevent the disruption of ceasefires. And if at all there was a disruption of ceasefire, the government by then has developed enough intelligence to effectively neutralize the Naxal cadres. So the negotiation was basically an important aspect of the government's approach to handle the left-wing extremism. Moving forward, there is a concept called area domination exercises. This was done by Central Armed Police Forces, or CAPF. These used to conduct area domination exercises in order to decrease the left-wing extremism activity, and this was a moderate success. Not a huge success, but it was a moderate success, and this is an important point because this is a key term, area domination exercises. Moving forward, there are rehabilitation schemes. And what are these rehabilitation schemes basically? So if you are a Naxal and you get rid of your Naxal hide, you come to the side of mainstream government, we are basically going to rehabilitate you. We are basically going to provide you with job opportunities, educational opportunities, and scholarship opportunities for you to live well in the mainstream country. Okay. And this is how we are trying to rehabilitate the Naxals. These schemes have become particularly important in order to prevent the youth from going into the Naxal fold. And those who have gone into the Naxal fold, they have come back precisely because of these schemes. Moving forward, the government has launched this important doctrine called the Samadhan Doctrine. This was launched by the Ministry of Home Affairs in 2017 or in the beginning of 2018. Okay, it is in 2017. So this is a comprehensive doctrine which has several prongs. It is a multi-pronged approach to handle the Naxal situation. So what does this mission Samadhan do, right? 1. It controls the arms supply to the Maoists. Next, it uses high technology like GPS trackers and drones in order to track the movement of the Naxal cadres. Once the movement of the Naxal cadres is effectively tracked, our police and intelligence agencies will be able to handle the situation better. One reason why we have not been able to handle this situation of Naxal movement is because these people used guerrilla warfare. This kind of warfare is effectively used in mountainous terrains where there are lots of forests and so on. These people hide themselves in the forests so that people from outside, as in the police officers who do not have much experience with the forests, will not be able to fight in these forests, especially when they set up landmines, when they shoot from treetops and so on. So if you have drones and GPS trackers and this kind of technology, you will be able to handle the Naxal cadres, especially because you will be able to track their movement. Next, there is an extra helicopter support for operations. In fact, the helicopter support has been increased in such a manner that even private helicopters have been employed, right? Moving forward, there is a stringent implementation of PMLA, which is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, in order to choke the funds of the left-wing extremism groups. This is a good point. So moving forward, he's talking about developmental efforts. So what is he trying to tell us? What has he done? Previously also he has given us certain points. Those were also government's approach, and this is also government's approach. What is the difference? The difference is, if this is the approach of the government, it has been broken down into two parts. One is the developmental side and the other is the security side. The security side is basically the hardcore approach we use. We use the strength, the force, the police and so on. The developmental side is basically what we use to help the people in order to bring them to the mainstream side of the country. So the developmental schemes like Van Bandhu Kalyan Yojana and so on, they have been launched for tribal development. And in addition to this, proper implementation of constitutional provisions for tribal inclusivity. So once these constitutional provisions for tribal inclusivity have been properly implemented, this has led to a situation in which the tribals have developed faith in the constitutional scheme, faith in the idea of state, faith in the idea of government, and they started moving away from the Naxal cadres. And then there was a media action plan to create developmental awareness. So whatever schemes have been launched by the government, whatever good steps have been taken by the government or the IAS officers and so on at the ground level, so these schemes were publicized in a good way, in a big way, so that people throughout the country and people especially in those Naxal areas got to know about these schemes, and they started availing the benefits of these schemes. They started benefiting from these schemes, and this has led to a decrease in the Naxal movement as such. Moving forward, there is proper implementation of PISA Act and the FRA Act 2006. This is basically the Forest Rights Act. Forest Rights Act 2006. So I want you to write these acts in full. Instead of writing small forms or short forms, write these acts in full. This might create some moderate negative impression in the minds of the examiner. So write the names in full. If you have to write it twice in the same answer, the first time you write it in full, the second time you can use the acronym, right? So moving forward, while these steps have decreased left-wing extremism incidents, the government should take further care to eliminate the problem of left-wing extremism. So this finishes the answer. This is a decent answer. He has talked about everything that has been asked in the question, but there is one thing that he could have added. He has told us that there is a decline in the Naxal activity, and he has also told us about the government's approach to handle the Naxal activity, but he should have had some side heading to talk about the persistence of Naxal activity, especially in the areas of West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, and so on. And having talked about them, he could have concluded by saying that there is still some amount of simmering problem, and this has to be properly solved by pushing forward whatever schemes, whatever measures the government has used in order to handle the situation. That could have increased the density of the answer, but this is also a good answer. He has done a decent job for a 7-minute effort. What I mean by a 7-minute effort is basically a 10 marker will take 7 minutes to write, 7.2 minutes. Moving forward, we will look at the question for tomorrow, and I want you to think about that question. So the question for tomorrow is on a northeast region of the country. The northeast region of India has been infested with insurgency for a very long time. This is a truth. Analyze the major reasons for the survival of armed insurgency in this region. So I want you to think about the subheadings you would use. Subheading A, B and C, so on. Think about this. Also think about the introduction and the conclusion for this particular answer. We will see how to address this answer tomorrow. And whenever you do this exercise of introduction, body and conclusion, I want you to keep in mind the prerequisites which I talked about. I talked about the possibility of a diagram. I talked about reports. In this particular question, is it possible to use both? Is it possible to use one of them? I want you to think about this. So I hope you have learned something from this particular discussion. Whatever points which you think are relevant for this particular answer but have not been pointed out in this particular question, please write them down in the comment section so that people who watch this video and go through the comments will benefit. Thank you. We'll meet again tomorrow.